where should we start? Should we start with Breslov? Should we start with Chabad? Should we start with some of the other traditions?
Well, we're starting? Well, I thought we already finished. We talked about everything. Okay.
We have a doctor in waiting,
Doctor in waiting.
Alexandra Mandelbaum,
Yes. Kopev.
from Kiev,
No, originally from Moscow.
from the former.
From the revolution Moscow. Now it's becoming the former.
Are you a revolutionary?
I was born during, the perestroika. So I was born there and raised in Israel, here.
How old were you when you came across, if I can ask?
I was 3.
3 years old.
Yeah.
Wow. But you spoke Russian at home?
Yeah, sure. I still speak Russian with my parents, with all my family.
Really? It's still a primary language of yours?
Yeah, like all immigrants. It's like now it became mixed. It's a Hebrew-Russian. Hebruski.
Hebruski, is that what they call it?
This is Hebruski.
And you're quite an expert on Chasidot, particularly Chasidot Breslov, if I'm correct. How did you get into studying Chasidot?
Well, I think it connected to the fact that I'm a woman. I think that when I studied, like for the first degree, and also for the second, I felt like I don't have enough. And I think that when I started the second degree, I imagined that will be, I called it my shtetl, my Bet Midrash, my imaginary place in which I can learn Kabbalah and Chasidism as much as I want. But somehow in the end of the process, I saw that besides of that, I also interested on the research of the thing, that I still have my point of view of an outsider, and this is like a beautiful point of view, an important point of view. So I kind of, I always laughed at myself as I nafalti la klipot. I fell into the, husks.
So you're saying you came initially to academia to try and have a little private shtetl to study your
exactly
text
as a woman, as a person who have to
right.
work and everything. So you can't just go and learn Torah, but
right.
you do a second degree, so it's okay.
But in the end, something about the academic process and methodology won you over.
Yeah, I think that somehow I didn't imagine that it would happen, but I'm some kind of found, I immigrated and I found like a new home, which is not so cozy home. Home, it's not the right word for it, but I found some kind of method and some kind of point of view that I find that is the most free and accurate one.
And did you grow up with being exposed to Chasidot and Jewish mysticism and these kinds of things?
Well, that's funny. Mysticism in Soviet Union, it's like a whole theme, because you don't have God. Like
right.
the basic contract between the Soviet person, the country, and the existence is that there is no God. So this is from one point of view. But from the other hand, I grew up in a family which didn't feel comfortable in this world of not having God. So my father converted to Judaism here in Israel, and my mother also entered this Jewish Orthodox life together with his conversion. So actually I grew up in a very, quite Orthodox environment. I don't know if I had the Chasidism or mysticism. I was exposed to Chabad and Breslov in the streets, as everybody in Israel, in graffiti, in all kinds of booklets that they, spread all around. So I was exposed to this for some way. And actually, a funny story, if I may.
Please, yeah.
I don't know who's the audience here.
No, we love funny stories.
I went on a date with somebody that I really liked when I was super young, not in an age to be so serious about dates. But after 10 days, I was fully in love, fully beorot, And then when he broke up with me, I wanted to have something from his world. And I remembered he had this book, Likutei Moharan, in his apartment, in his very chor, in his, like, basement. So I went, after we broke up, I cried the streets of Jerusalem and entered very, intuitively to a shop and bought this Likutei Moharan. And it kind of, I think it was so funny because I forgot him the day after. But something else happened. So a lot of, I think that gaguim, how do you say gaguim? Yearnings. Well,
The
such a big
pining.
way. Yeah, but something about this, like, was the opening gate for me to the book of Likutei Moharan. So it was kind of interesting.
You might say in the academic world that you sublimated your erotic attachment, your love
To a love of
from-
the book.
from the man to the book. It sounds like a good exchange.
It was the right exchange. I think it was the
Can
right.
I get you a glass of water?
Yeah.
So, you grew up in the former Soviet Union, or as it was falling apart.
Yeah.
Your father converted to Judaism. It was an atheistic country, an atheistic household.
Not quite. I have this super Soviet, not Soviet, super Slavic grandmother who is like, believes in all these iconas of Jesus or everything. So I have this also.
Oh, fascinating.
So it's a combination. It's a combination.
Your father's family, they were Orthodox?
No, nobody was Orthodox, but maybe like 3 generations.
Right.
The whole story of the Jewish, this Russian Soviet Judaism is so interesting because when you go back 3 generations, you find a lot of Yiddish and a lot of, it's actually like exactly like those people who went to the States and maybe stayed in Europe. But the thing is that when they moved to the communities that were inside Russia, when the communists came, so it wasn't like possible even like to stay religious
Right.
and to be Orthodox or to keep things because they took like the basic things of Judaism. You can't teach Hebrew, you can't write books, you can't sell books, the Bible, the Siddur, all like basic things. You can't go to synagogue, you can't do all those things that keep you Jewish. And from the other hand, you have this great historical opportunity to become a normal person, one of the society. And for Jewish people, this was a lot. This was like, I don't know, the energy was like the Messiah came, when you become communist, when you
The
just...
Red Messiah.
Hmm?
The Red Messiah.
Yeah, when you give up, you just have to give up your name. You just have to give up a few of your, things, and you will become a normal person. And I think that as I read more about like the 20th century, I understand that it was so important for them to feel like there could be the world, like they really believed in communism in the beginning. And after they believed and they changed, and I think then the communist regime has closed like upon them. And the father actually of my grandmother, David Ginsburg, he was sitting in Gulag. He was sent to the Gulag for 8 years. And then he passed away not a year or something like this after he came back from the Gulag. So, and he was a very proud communist man. He married a Russian woman. He didn't care from his, Ginsburg Jewish name. But in the end, they caught him also, and they put him in the Gulag. So, despite the fact my family was not, this side of my father's family wasn't Jewish by the halachic world, it was very much, it had a lot of like connection to Judaism because of the suffer of this grandfather. So it's so complicated when you talk about Russian Soviet Judaism.
Right.
It's not a binary question whether they have God or don't have God.
Right.
And in general, God is like a very personal thing
Yes.
to ask about.
Yes.
It's not like in Israel that everybody has a God, has an opinion, has a...
But your family immigrated to Israel,
Yeah.
and you shared a story through a boyfriend that you had briefly
Okay. You don't have to put everything. You don't have to put everything.
that you
Before the glass of water, I was a bit confused. So.
you got turned
Yeah.
on to Chasidut, Hasidism.
Specific Breslov Hasidism
specifically
caught me.
Breslov.
I think it was like the Breslov theme that I found like fascinating. I just want to say that the fact that I came to Breslov Hasidism from a book, from a shop that I bought the book, okay, put the arrows aside, I think it shows the way this Chassidut is like open to all kinds of people, because you don't have a tzaddik that you have to go, you don't have a specific rabbi that you have to follow. So in a way, the dead rabbi is kind of, allowing more people to connect with.
Rabbi Nachman, yeah.
It's actually a startup.
It's a startup.
It's a startup before the Lubavitcher.
It's
Don't want
It's a
to
startup.
fight today, but
It's a startup today or to startup back then?
it was a startup back then. It was very strange. It was in a generation when, the Hasidic movement is manifested itself. People, had their courts, and people have, started to arrive to the rabbi a few times a year, or maybe even live next to him and give him money, or kind of ktavit kashrut. A lot of connection between people and a specific rabbi. It was like in a generation when it was already Hasidic movement.
Right.
And then when he passed away without leaving anybody else, so it was a big gap. They felt orphans. This is how Rabbi Natan is writing. They felt really, really orphans. They didn't understand what's going on.
The followers of Rabbi Nachman,
The
the
followers.
founder of the Breslov movement. Can you give us some historical dates just so we can understand when it is and where it is that we're talking about?
He was born in 1772, I think. You should check it. In 1772, but he passed away in 1810. So he passed away really young. He was ill, quite ill, 2 years before. And when he moved to Uman, which is the place that, you recognize the most with Rabbi Nachman, maybe, Breslov and Uman, but Uman, is, because he's buried there, he already knew that he's going to die. It wasn't his wife and his son has passed away a few years before, so he knew what's going to happen. So it's quite interesting, the fact that he didn't leave somebody after him.
Right.
In this gap, you can see in the diary of his big student, Rabbi Natan, you can see that in his diary, Rabbi Natan is writing, Yemei Mo'aranat, he says, when he was about to die, he went in the apartment and he saw Rabbi Nachman is lying. And he said, in the way he looked upon me, I understand that I have a permission to guide the world, to be a leader. So this is very interesting, because we see that Rabbi Nachman didn't say anything.
Right.
And his student have to kind of half imagine that he has a permission to guide the world. Or maybe he did have, I don't know what
that he received just in that glance.
Yeah. This is what
Very interesting.
yeah.
This is a theme which we discussed briefly yesterday. We had lunch together. We thought that we would speak about this. Is about the role of the Rebbe in the Hasidic world. The question of succession, the question of leadership in general, the question of how much faith does the Hasidic world, past and present, have in individuals to self-lead. So maybe we'll start, because we're going to do this kind of half academically, half historically, half existentially, half spiritually, a bit between many worlds here. Can you tell us, maybe just for the listener, what is a Rebbe in Chasidism?
Well, the Rebbe is a person that is not a halachic person. It's not a person that you go in order to have answers to some kind of halachic questions. So this is
Jewish law.
The Jewish law, It's a Rebbe is a person, a Rebbe, or I will prefer the name the tzaddik, right? The tzaddik is a person that in his existence in the world is symbolizing the fact that God exists in the world, in the lower world, in a much more deeper level than we thought. Meaning not only when we pray, or when people do some kind of, perform religious acts, but also in the everyday life. And the meaning of this is that the rabbi actually cares from the person the woman, the person who suffers, the people who need help in his community. Well, it's much more complicated because it goes further. Okay, the rabbi is not only expanded social worker. He's also a spiritual man, and he has also power. And throughout the Hasidic movement, rabbis had a lot of power and also financial power. The Hasidic courts, meaning people who lived around rabbis, they gave the rabbis some kind of some amount of money, and the rabbis, in some point of view, also had gained a lot of power in the Jewish community. So, not all of them. Some of the rabbis were very, individuals and went, without courts. We didn't want to have the Chasids coming to them. You know the example of Chabad, the first rabbi of Chabad, Rebbe Shneur Zalman of Ladi. He told his Chasidim not to come wherever they want to ask for his advice. He set times when the Hasidim can come, the Hasidim, the followers, can come and talk to him. Also, the theme of miracles. We have a lot of super interesting culture of telling stories about rabbis and how they performed all kinds of miracles. And you can see rabbis who are really far from this and say that's not the right way. But some of them say that they always tell about themselves that they do have these powers. I just, like Shifchei Besht, right? You have all the book that talks about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement.
Right. So the Rebbe or the Tzaddik, and those words are going to be used slightly interchangeably, although they have different meanings and different associations. It's a bit of a tough question to ask. What is a Rebbe? What is a Tzaddik? Because it's a question that can be answered on many levels, and you began to point to some sociological, historical, societal, but there's also metaphysical that you start off by saying. So there's really many axes where that individual and that role plays. But in some senses, the worldly reality, the power, the political power, the social power, the financial power which they wield, is also intertwined with the metaphysical power. They're agents of the divine. Their access of the divine flow into reality, the shefa, God's sustenance comes through them often. So there's perhaps a intermingling there between the metaphysical and the social, and the metaphysical and the physical, we could say, right?
Yeah, and I think also we should, when we go to this the limit between the metaphysical and the financial and the political, I think it's a very dangerous place, And I think that a lot of people are exposed to the dangerous sides of this, of cults. And when the Hasidic movement actually started, a lot of scholars, from Jewish scholars of Chochmat Israel, people who started the Haskalah movement, the Enlightenment movement in the Jewish society, they were really worried that most of the people will follow this kind of rabbis and give them power, and also will become, they won't think individually.
Right. It was a form of charismatic leadership as well.
Yeah, and I think the charisma is also something very complicated and to hold. And I think that rabbis, the interesting thing is that they kind of knew it. We have also, sometimes texts that talk about their self-reflection upon this power, on the power they have, such as the Rashaz, Rebbe Shneur Zalman of Ladi. He said to people, don't come every day, because they wanted to come every day.
Right.
So this is delicate. The rabbi is not alone. You don't have any tzaddik, which is just a tzaddik without followers, right? Who said that tzaddik is a tzaddik, right? He has some kind of audience.
Right. It's the people that coronate the king, that make him king.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting, and your engagement with this institution of the Rebbe Chasid relationship, the tzaddik and their followers, is an interesting one, because I see you have both a lot of attraction to it, a lot of admiration, a lot of respect for its power, but also a lot of concern for its power.
Yeah, I think I couldn't be like a Chasid, like a total Chasid of something. I think because of my personal biography, which is, now I understand it is connected. First, when you asked me about where I grew up, from what's my background, I thought, what does it matter? But when I think about it, like in a deeper level, I think that I'm vaccinated from admiration. I have, anti-admiration gene, so I can't remove it.
You already grew up with godlike figures.
Exactly. I finished this the last chapter. Right. So now I'm just curious from this phenomenon, and I think I would always be kind of looking from inside and outside. I think this is like a position.
Yeah, it does seem from our conversations that you are both inside and outside. It's quite a fascinating place that you are. I think that this is not only a question which is relevant to the historical study of Jewish mysticism and Chasidism, and also to contemporary forms of Chasidism which continue, and we'll speak about the continuations of those movements and new Hasidic movements that are emerging. But I think it's also a question in general of leadership, whether that's with a celebrity and their followers, the role that charisma plays, with musicians and with actors and politicians now that have become equally celebritized, but also in our individual lives, as we mentioned yesterday, as parents, as teachers, as mentors. There's always that threat of wielding power over someone, of abuse of power, of charisma. How much can we allow people to flourish as individuals? How much do people want to be led? I think these are really broadly relevant questions.
It's super delicate question, because I think also in the New Age world, when you have a lot of healers, and also, you have a lot of exposure to the world of the subconscious, the unknown, the mystical, the energy, a lot of terms that we know that the world is more than only the phenomenon we see. And then in this world, when somebody comes and declares himself as somebody who knows more, so I think that temptation is there. And I think it's a real temptation, like to go and to say, okay, somebody else will lead me, somebody will show me in this very, very blurred, you can say blurry, yeah, in this blurry world, somebody will show me the path, somebody will show me the way. But I just want to say something else, that also when we are afraid of something, there is also sometimes a potential there. Right. Because I think that the temptation or the wish for having a real guidance and being that somebody will see you as being a student, it's a big thing, more than finding the right guru or something. I think that being in the position of knowing that you are still a student and you wanting to be in this position, and that somebody, but you're a student not of the world, a student of somebody, not a student of the internet, of the Wikipedia, right? A student of a specific person who watches you, who knows your name. And I think the power of it, we can't just neglect it and say, okay, it's just people just misuse it and that's it. We don't have the structure of teachers, and because then we lose something very, very fundamental in ourselves. So we also, I think, should be like generous with our will to find gurus. Right. It's a real thing.
Right.
It's
I hear that. Yeah. So you're saying that the power and the danger that's present in the guru-disciple, teacher-student relationship isn't a reason why it should be entirely cancelled and dismissed. You're saying on the contrary, it's actually pointing to its importance and its potency and its psychological weight that it carries when it's done in a healthy way.
I think so. Although I can't say that I have like personal good experience. Most of my teachers were very far away from me, and I don't think most of them knew my name. So maybe it's also my personal wish, but right. I haven't got like this experience. It's not but I do have like the how do you say
patience
for it.
Right. Fascinating. I think we've opened up the universality of this question.
Yeah.
Because it really is a universal question.
For sure.
And it's a question particularly relevant to religious and mystical and spiritual traditions, where there is the person who guides us through the unknown, which goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, the original etymology, the hierophant, the one who shows the individual through the the revelation, and it continues till today. I think perhaps the best way to tackle universal questions is through a very particular case example, right? And insofar as each particularity reflects the entirety of the situation, we can also learn something about the universal from the particular. There's that deep relationship there. And I think the best particular example is the world of Chasidut. And then within the world of Chasidut, perhaps we can differentiate and distinguish between different traditions within that world and how each one throughout the generations negotiates this question of leader and student, disciple and follower, Rebbe and Chasid. So where should we start? Should we start with Breslov? Should we start with Chabad? Should we start with some of the other traditions?
Well, we're starting? Well, I thought we already finished. We talked about everything. Okay. Well, I would start with the Besht, because he's the most interesting example for me, but also...
Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Chassidic movement.
Yeah, and also I would like us to have a quick stop in Rabbi Menachem Mendel from Vitebsk.
Nice.
Because don't go always to the to the obvious, Chabad and Breslov,
Right. You also mentioned yesterday the Kotzker.
Yeah.
Menachem Mendel of Kotzk. You'd
It's
like to
also
bring
an
in as well.
interesting figure also. Well, he's a radical. The last one you mentioned, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzk, I think is quite radical, and because he shut himself in a closed room for a few years, if I recall.
He shut himself,
not shut himself.
Not shut himself.
I'm sorry.
Right. He died of natural causes. It's all good.
No, but let's start from the beginning. If we start from the Besht, we see the appearance of this charismatic figure. The Baal Shem Tov is considered to be, the first one who started this Hasidic movement. And it's funny because he didn't create any movement. He didn't open, any company or Bet Midrash or something very, Masudar. How do you say Masudar? Organized, yes.
So I like your proposal to begin with the father of the Chassidic movement, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, a person who I love dearly.
Why do you love him?
I love him. Listen, I never met him. He died more than 200 years ago.
Yeah.
But he lives on. He lives on in the movement. I was born into a Chassidic family, part of the Chassidic movement, and I still identify with it very proudly. The way that he's been painted, and there's been a lot of painting of him done throughout the years, right? You started off by speaking about the Shivchei HaBesht, the hagiography, telling his miracle stories. But to me, what I see in him, and maybe this is my own reflection, projection onto him, I see a very pure character who saw to the core of religion, who saw beyond the rules and regulations, saw to its heart. He saw that what it demanded was sincerity. Rachmana liba by, God wants the heart. God doesn't want your words and your sacrifices. Sort of this prophetic message of coming back to the simplicity, almost like a Jesus-like figure, if we can upset some people with that comparison, bringing us back to the real core of religion, to realizing that we're here only for a short time in this world, and we best use it wisely to connect with ourselves, with nature. He was a man who spent a lot of time in nature with one another, and he also cared for the least among them. He cared for the downtrodden, for the neglected. He was combating an institution of elitist Judaism where people were valued based on how much Torah they knew. And he said, no, it's not how much Torah you know. It's the fact that you have a divine soul inside of you, and your sincere calling out to God is worth more than the sage's years of study. So to me, it's like he's like an intoxicating figure. This beautiful simplicity, this person who, according to the Chabad tradition, his name calls the Jewish people out of this state of fainted, of unconsciousness, back to their true selves.
Well, so tell me, that's beautiful. So when you're talking about
but I'm here to interview you.
No, but this is I think much more. I think it was beautiful, but then I'm asking myself, what happened then? How come a person which is so radical, and he says, it's not about how much you learn, it's about where's your heart. But then when the Hasidic movement is becoming, it's manifested and it has so many books and so many knowledge, and it's so much based on the Kabbalah, and and then I ask myself, maybe something is gone,
Yeah.
Not to go, I don't want to spoil the party, but but how do you Chabad explain it? Do you people?
You're kind.
What's your explanation for this gap?
I think it's a really great question, and I think it's part of the inherent sort of dialectical, if we can use a fancy word, nature of religious development itself, where there's a character who calls people to God, to service,
to be
humility,
authentic, to be
to authenticity, and that's like the Moses figure who leads the people out of their own slavery and to encounter something beyond them, greater than them. And then what happens inevitably is that has to be codified. It has to be put into laws. You can't just be hippies doing revivals forever. It has to be put into social action, and it has to be put into institutions. But the problem is that those institutions then they cover up what the original message was, and part of that means that there's learning, right? It has to be put into text. And I think that this battle, this dance between inspiration, hashra'ah, between the divine fire that comes and rests upon the people and they speak in the voice of God, to then the recording of those messages that get passed on and get emptied down. This is a classic issue. There's the famous Talmudic discussion of the idolatry of Baal Pa'or, of the ecstatics who would come and worship their idols with such ecstasy that they would lose control of their bodies and they would defecate. But it was done out of this pure ecstatic experience, and then their children saw that their worship was that they came to the idol and they did their business in front of the idol, and that became the entire practice.
That became
so this is such a classic problem of religion, of religion becoming the fire of religion becoming extinguished because of the very things that are trying to keep it alive.
And also the question of expanding something, the question is whether you can keep a secret in secret, but when you want a lot of people to have this secret, so you must do something. Something is lost when you're talking about the mass. And when we're talking about the mass, it's funny because I'm the mass. I'm the person from the street who didn't grow up in a Hasidic family. That because of the ability of the Hasidic movement to write books, to spread itself in the streets of Jerusalem, I could, access those secrets. So it's funny because the spread of the movement, the Baal Shem Tov himself, he saw it in the Excerpt Besht, a famous letter that he wrote, and he wrote to Reb Gershon Kitover, his brother-in-law. He writes about his Aliyat Neshama, the ascent of the soul that he did. He did this kind of worship, or kind of a religious experience, shamanic journey, or I don't know, a kind of journey in Rosh Hashanah, in the Jewish New Year Eve. And when he did this journey, he said that he went from one heichal to heichal, from one chamber to another in the upper worlds, and he saw the Messiah. He actually saw the Messiah, and he was a very good Jew because he came to the Messiah and he says, when are you coming? We're waiting. Exactly, and he says, meaning when your springs will spread among, the world, and the meaning is that these teachings will not stay only yours, and this is, I think, he knew that it would happen, despite the fact he didn't write any books.
Right. So you're saying that the part of the tragedy of Chasidism, the loss of the romantic interiority, sincerity, was also part of the process, that it had to be spread, and that was part of the mission.
Yeah, I think this is part of the mission, and I think this is like the secret is to ask whether something from this the charisma of the beginning of this pure message that was in that the Baal Shem Tov bring to the world, whether it's kept or not nowadays, and also in books, which is my favorite thing in the world, is books.
You're saying, is that spark captured in the book in some sense?
Yeah, and I think this is very interesting question when you come to a book, because it's like the opposite of charisma.
Right. Right.
Right? The book, it's the opposite of the internet. It's the opposite of what we're doing now.
Right. It's interesting because the Baal Shem Tov himself doesn't call Chasidut, that term only comes later. He calls it Eish Das Lamai. He calls it the fiery word of God. Right?
Right.
And this is what we're asking. Can the fiery word of God be captured in a book or in a podcast?
yeah. This is a very good question. I think it's unanswered, right? I think that the motivation should stay there. I think that we don't know whether it could happen or not, but I think something from the motivation should be there. And
the motivation, you mean the attempt?
The attempt. This is an attempt, and attempts is always, you take in account that you'll fail, but at least you tried.
Right.
So that's something very powerful to try.
To at least try, to
at least
aspire
try,
to that.
yeah.
It's interesting, I think this question that we're speaking about today, which is such an important question, and we're now we have our feet on two big questions. The question of the saint and the follower, the Rebbe and the Chasid, and also the question of now how do we maintain and contain the fire of religion. I think these are questions that are being asked by the early Hasidic movement itself. I know within the Chabad tradition, for example, there's a very famous episode where the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, goes to jail. And there's all kinds of practical, political reasons why that happened. He was sending money to Israel, which is under the Ottoman Empire, which was the enemy of Russia, and all kinds of technical things. But on a spiritual reading, according to the Hasidic texts themselves, it's because he was spreading Chasidut so far and wide that it was even beyond the Baal Shem Tov's original idea of spreading the wellsprings forward.
Like too much. Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And there was, and the way that it's manifest is that there was sort of this text that was found in the gutter or in the garbage, and that text was kind of flown up by an angel to God and said, "Look where your precious gem is." But it's not just a question of the desecration of a text. It's also does the message still stay there once it's become turned into a text and so far from a living embodiment of what the text is supposed to be demonstrating.
I keep thinking about nowadays Breslov Hasidism in Israel, which is this specific group of Hasidim that inside this specific group you have a specific section and they do graffiti. In all of Israel you have this graffiti of Nana Nachman Meuman.
Right.
It's a specific group inside of the Breslov Hasidism who believe that their Rebbe Israel Odesser, who passed away in the 19th, is in a very old age. When he was young in Tzfat, he told people that he got this note from heaven, from above, and in this note it was written Nana Nachman Meuman, which is kind of a strange way to write Rabbi Nachman from Breslov, from Uman, because he's buried in Uman. And he said that this is a pretext, it's kind of something sacred, something important, and something also Messianic. So the followers of this specific session, they do this graffiti under bridges in Israel or in all kinds of places. And then you think about it, something you have a garbage can, and next to it this graffiti, and you ask yourself, haven't we gone too far with all the idea that God is everywhere, and that tzaddik can be everywhere, and the tzaddik is everyone can hold it, and everyone can receive a note from heaven? And
you're saying this expression of the graffiti of this petek, of this special letter to every single street corner of Israel and bumper stickers and trash cans. You're saying is the real demonstration of what's left in that message, what's being. Is the spark of Chasidism present on the trash can that has the Nanach graffiti on it?
My personal, just because it's the podcast, my personal view is yes, that something is kept there. This is people trying to connect to something which is upper than the trash can. I think it's beautiful.
The people who are doing the graffiti.
I think it's beautiful. But I think that I look at this thing as an attempt to uplift the reality and the broken reality. And those people know that they are broken. People will stand in the corner and ask you for a coin, But knowing they're broken, sometimes it's in a way, for me, it's much more healed place than thinking that you're not broken, and you know everything. And I think this is, from a Hasidic point of view, being able to admit that you're broken, that you're a trash can, and like laugh about it, and I don't know, just say, just pray that, you know, Rabbi Nachman is with you, or imagine that Rabbi Nachman is with you, even though he's dead. So for me, I think it's beautiful.
Right, and there's something particular in your description to Breslov, which deals with the sort of the brokenness of the human, perhaps more than any other Hasidic movement. You know, they say an anecdote that there are 3 major texts written around a similar time in that early Hasidic moment, which is the Tanya of Shner Zaman of the Idea of Chabad.
Yeah.
There's the Noam Elimelech of Elimelech of Lezhensk, and then there's the Lukatei Moharan from Reb Nachman. And the famous saying is that Rabbi Elimelech
is the first.
That he writes for the tzaddik, he writes for the saint amongst us. The Tanya is famously also called Sefer Shel Benonim. It's for the
average,
for the intermediate. Although in Tanya, Benoni doesn't mean average, but in the, let's say, in the classic sense, it's for the average person. And then Lukatei Moharan is for the Rasha, for the wicked amongst us.
Well, what could I say after this story? No, but
so why are you attracted to Lukatei Moharan?
I think it's an awful saying, right? I think it's the way they got it all wrong.
Yeah, tell me why.
I see the Lukatei Moharan as a very mystical, very elitistic also book. When you open it and try to learn it, it's like you get like confused and kind of, you know, the most common word in the Lukatei Moharan is bchinat, meaning you can't even explain what it is. So you do have these places in Breslov in which Rabbi Nachman is talking about being sad, being sinful, but also you have a lot of places in which he writes about very, very high and very spiritual experiences of being connected to the Shekhinah, or being connected to the Tzaddik Emet, and you have a lot of different kind of moments. So I think Breslov Hasidism has bad reputation. it's a thing of bad reputation. By the way, bad reputation. Rabbi Nachman himself had bad reputation
during his lifetime.
Yeah. And he used it, and he kind of talked about it, and he said, "Yes, this is a proof that I'm a real tzaddik, because I have people who are against me,
right.
And meaning they kind of cover me, so I can like every secret have to have this kind of cover.
Right.
Those mitnagdim are okay." So this is another kind of story. You know, you told the story about Shneor Zalman Miladi being arrested, and the ethos of why does it happen to us, right? So this is a different kind of ethos, like the fact that you don't have to cancel your mitnagdim, your opponents, your people, opposition. It's there. It's just there. The evil is there.
Right, and it's playing a metaphysical role, that it becomes the husk. It becomes that protects the fruit or something.
Exactly.
Right. No, it is fascinating, the amount of controversy that Rabbi Nachman raised in his lifetime, the amount of opposition. Famously, the Shpala Zeder and others were very, very much opposed to him. And he is this sort of tormented master, as the title of one book describes him, both perhaps internally and externally. But it's fascinating how he channels that opposition, as opposed to allowing it to defeat him. We've entered into a whole world here of charismatic leadership and continuity and legacy, and I just think there's so many directions that
well, you know what Rabbi Nachman says, that his Torahs are like a castle, that you go inside and suddenly you see this side room, and you go inside there, and then like you forget your master plan, like why did you came to the castle? Why did we get so this is like
right. And then there's that famous teaching from Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoi that the entire castle is all the Shechina, is all God. So
it's okay. It's okay.
wherever we get,
I know. What about the listeners?
No. I'm sure it'll be an enjoyable journey into the castle as well. Rabbi Nachman himself is very self-aware of his position, of his relationship to his contemporaries, to his followers. He writes a lot about, in Likutei Moharan, about the temptation of power that comes from teaching, from leading, and ways that we have to guard ourselves against that. There's one very beautiful excerpt in Likutei Moharan, and I'll just start us off, and then maybe I'll see. I'll ask what you'd like to add. Where he writes that one has to be very, very careful of the temptation that comes with teaching, teaching spirituality, and he points out he doesn't mince his words. He points out that the temptation is a sexual one, that teachers can take advantage of their students, which is something that we see so often today amongst gurus, amongst spiritual teachers. And then he writes that the cure for this is to make sure that while you're teaching, he writes in very, very stark language how one has to be so careful that they're not doing it from any ego and from any external influence. And he says elsewhere in a parallel text in Likutei Moharan that what keeps one on the straight and narrow is to keep in mind Shuatan Shel Yisrael, the salvation, the redemption of Israel. That has to be your only intention when teaching.
The major plan.
The major plan, right? That you have to keep your eyes on the goal. That is this, and we could maybe perhaps expand that language a bit. The salvation of humanity, the salvation of planet Earth and reality as a whole. And when you're focused on that, all the other nonsense, all the other temptations and ego and metrics, they can all fall away. So to me, I see him that he has a self-awareness of the power and danger, and he also has solutions and remedies. I'm curious, what kind of remedies are you seeing emerging within the Hasidic world? Because I think we can talk a lot about the challenges and the problems, and they're important to highlight.
Like what are the solutions?
Yeah, but what are the solutions
the problems
for these?
of the charisma?
Particularly from within Hasidic thought and text themselves.
Well, if we stay a bit more in the Breslov area, I think that Rabbi Nachman, as I see him, I think he also did a lot of things to reject the charisma, to reject people from sticking to him and to thinking they're the only students. And I actually remember a different Torah, Likutei Moharan Tinyana Zayin, I think. You see that he talks about what's better. It's a discussion from the Gemara. What's better to have, like a student or a son? Who will keep your data kadosh who will keep you in the world, like after you go?
Who will carry on your sacred legacy?
Exactly. But not legacy in the way of some kind of content, more like spiritual, presence, like a real dad of a person what stays after a person is gone. And despite the fact he respects the traditional idea of a son, of this is like all people can understand this, right? Living as a son. He said he, in a way, prefers the student because he said that a son can follow you or not follow you. You can live something. Maybe you won't go in your ways, but the student will follow you. So you have some kind of a deeper connection with the student because you're connected in the spiritual level. And then he says something very, very difficult for me to say, that the teacher kind of like he created the student. This is very, very difficult. But then after a few passages, he moves to a different kind of model, and he says, and each person can be a teacher and a student for each and every one. This model of a student and a teacher, it's not me, the rabbi, and the students, especially in the Rabbi Nachman, which is dead. It's also each two persons, two people that, gather together, and somebody is teaching somebody. In the same moment, he is his teacher, and he is a teacher. And one person can be a student from one point of perspective, but a teacher from another. So each one has something that he can teach the other. And this is a state of mind. It's not a state of institutes, of students, teachers, students, gurus, not gurus. in something much more deep, the experience of being able to learn something and being able to teach someone something. So even in Breslov, I see this, limitation of the power.
That's a very beautiful way to frame it. That it's not a question of institution and sort of a unilateral power imbalance, but that we're all students and teachers of each other constantly, and that as teachers we have to see ourselves as students, right? And this it's sort of a deconstruction of the binary and dichotomy and the power between teacher and student. Which goes back in some senses to the Mishnah, right? Which says that I learned a lot from my teachers, more from my peers, and most from my students, which means that my students are my teachers in some sense, which returns them to the beginning of the Mishnah, right? I feel that way as well. You've spent many years teaching yourself. I've spent a few years in different traditional forms and now non-traditional forms teaching. I feel that you said interesting that he says that the student makes the teacher. Sorry, that the teacher makes the students.
The teacher makes the students. It makes in a way like parents make the molidim.
Right. Which also goes back to the classic Talmudic debate of the son versus the student. Which relationship takes preference? Which has legal implications, right? If you find a lost object, you're supposed to return it to your teacher, not to your father, because your teacher brings you into the next world, and your father only brought you into this world, and the next world is greater. So these are old questions.
They're awful.
Whether we like them or not, these are. I'm just saying that these are very old questions that percolate in the Jewish mind throughout the ages.
Not only Jewish, right? It's like it's in a Platonic, it's a very
in the Platonic dialogues.
Platonic dialogues. It's also like a big, major issue of a student and a teacher-student relationship. It's very big question.
Right. Yeah. So you're right. It's definitely a universal question, not just a Jewish question. You were saying that it's this strange phrase that the teacher creates the student.
Yeah.
Right. Which the father creates the child in some sense, but I think that the student creates the teacher too. Right, we come thinking that we're going to be sharing something or teaching something or giving something over, but it's the reception of the student that very much forms what it is that we have to give. This is a question that's dealt a lot in Chasidut as well, which is that the feminine, who's the recipient in Hasidic metaphysics, becomes the giver. Malchut becomes Keter. This is a very classic dialectic in Chabad thought. Do you see that relationship being discussed and sort of complexified in Breslov Hasidut as well?
Well, you have it in the third generation, Rabbi Nachman of Cherin. He started to talk, Rabbi Natan before also, he started to say, we're all students of students, Talmidim shel Talmidim. And he started to talk about and to write about the fact that now when the Rabbi is gone, what's left is to be a Talmid of a Talmid. But there is a beautiful saying also in Breslov that Ashrei ha'enayim shera'u ha'enayim shera'u ha'enayim shera'u et Rabbeinu. It's like happy is the eyes that saw the eyes of the students, that saw the eyes of the students, that saw Rabbi Nachman.
Right.
So you have
That's a beautiful expression.
It's a beautiful expression because it's in a way says that it's not only about the books, it's also about the people who actually got this tradition.
Right.
And
the eyes that saw.
The eyes that saw the eyes.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that they're already dealing with these questions of teacherlessness and students that become teachers in the third generation.
From the beginning, from the second, from Rabbi Natan, he said, we're orphans, what are you going to do?
Right.
His answer is basically, Rabbi Natan is going to print a lot of books, the maximum books he can. He takes all his money. He opens this printing house in his house. And it's very, very illegal back then. And he prints as much as he can, Hasidic material.
This is under communism already.
No, it's before communism. It's before.
Sorry.
No, it's 1835.
Okay.
He opens it, under the Tsar, and he can't. Everything is very organized. You can't open a printing house.
Right.
Okay, so you have censorship. You have a lot of things that you have to do before you print a book. And he opens this printing house, gives all his money. He also so this is his project. Also, he collects students, like new followers, especially from the young people. They follow Rabbi Natan. The older students of Rabbi Nachman are not, they don't respect Rabbi Natan so much. We don't know a lot about it. We don't have their books. History is written by the winners.
Right.
So in a way, this is true about the first students of Rabbi Nachman. We don't know exactly what they thought about Rabbi Natan taking this kind of leadership.
Right. The leadership that he received through the eyes.
Through the eyes.
Right.
But the leadership, it's a leadership. It's not quite being a rabbi.
Right.
He wants to say, they talk about Hash'arato HaKdosha, his sacred remain of Rabbi Nachman.
Right.
They want to keep
the residue.
Yeah, they want to keep Rabbi Nachman's present in the world. So one of the things they're going to do, except of printing books, is to start to go on Rosh Hashanah. They're starting this custom of going to Rosh Hashanah to Uman, to Rabbi Nachman's grave, and pray there.
Right.
Yeah, in the Jewish New Year. And they pray there they don't pray for Rabbi Nachman, but Rabbi Nachman is a kind of a lawyer for them. He's a kind of somebody who connects them to God. And nowadays you have, before the war, 100,000 people coming to Uman each year. So it became really a mass movement.
Right.
And the purpose of it was to make Rabbi Nachman's charisma kind of stay in the world.
Fascinating.
This is also an attempt.
Fascinating.
Everything is attempts, very poor ones.
Right. They're all attempts. That's the whole.
But beautiful.
Right. You're appreciating the attempts. It's interesting. I want to apologize. Usually I don't talk so much during the interviews. I'm here more I'm here more to ask questions and to listen. But this is such a exciting subject, which is so close to my heart, that I feel compelled to share as well. So I hope that's
you
okay.
Have something? No, sure. For me, it's great. It's a conversation.
Okay, good. It's really, really fascinating to think about what you're describing in the first generations of Breslov, following the passing of Rabbi Nachman, the great master. To think about my own experience growing up as a child. I was born in 1994, the year that the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away.
Wow.
Physically.
Physically. That's interesting.
Because the Talmud says that the wicked Rishaim, during their lifetimes, even while they're biologically, physically alive, they're already dead because their lives are meaningless. They're purposeless. But the tzaddik, even in their death, they're called alive. Tzaddikim af b'mitatam kuim chayim. So it's hard for me to say that the Rebbe is dead, because for me he's not dead at all. For me he's very much a living presence.
Well, what's dead anyway?
Right, right. No, so we're blurring the lines between teacher and student, between death and life. These are all lines that get blurred in the Hasidic discourse. So, but the sense of being an orphan is a sense which I very much felt growing up, and a sense which was shared amongst my generation and those that came a bit before me as well, that experienced Rebbe's passing. But also the sense of seeing the eyes that saw the eyes is very beautiful, but it's also very sad, right?
It's very sad.
There's this desire that emerges from the biblical prophets that says "V'hayu einecha romet moecha," that your eyes, this blessing, that your eyes should be deserving to glance upon your teacher, upon your master. And I never saw the Rebbe alive. I saw the eyes of those that saw him. Right, I lived with the inspiration of those that experienced it themselves. And for me, it's very sad and very beautiful.
It's beautiful. I think it gives you the freedom and the power, like, to create your own way. I think I look on this as an opportunity, as a very generous thing, that the rabbi didn't leave anybody after him. If you did have another rabbi, so you will follow this rabbi and not the Lubavitcher rabbi, right?
Right. So I think that's the big question that we want to ask here, and that we began to ask yesterday, which is why didn't these Rebbeim, these rabbis, leave succession? Why didn't Rabbi Nachman appoint a successor? Why didn't Rabbi Menachem?
Well, the Lubavitcher didn't leave anyone because some would say he thought he's the last one, right?
Right.
The last one, but then it's interesting. The last of what? Right? האחרון. Meaning, האחרון בתוך משהו, like the last one inside of, or there is the first, the second, the third, last.
The last of exile and the first of redemption is how
the redemption, right.
Yeah.
So this is very radical to think he said about himself he's the last.
Yeah. The Rebbe in the very first Maimer, the very first public discourse that the Rebbe gave when he accepted the leadership,
Bati Legani,
which we discussed yesterday briefly, the Rebbe said that this is the seventh generation. Because it's the seventh, based on a Talmudic discussion, it means that we're the last generation of exile and the first generation of redemption. Like Moses was the seventh, and he was the last generation of exile of Egypt, and the first generation of redemption. And that's explicit. And this is not. People think that the Rebbe's Messianism only began at the end of his life when things were dying down. The Messianism was there from the very first public inaugural address. And the Rebbe writes in his diary, which we have after he passed physically, that when he was 3 years old in Cheder, in a childhood elementary school back in Russia, that the Rebbe says that I had in my eyes, talking about eyes as well, I had in my eyes a vision of a redeemed world, of a Messianic reality. And the Rebbe says I never let that vision leave my eyes.
Wow.
So
this is what is vision from the beginning.
Yeah.
Listen, growing up in Russia in the 3 years old is very dangerous, as we started in the beginning.
It was a dangerous time. And the Rebbe writes about times that as a child that there was danger and they had to protect other children. Dangerous time. So it's a fascinating conversation we are having, about the role of leadership, of tutelage, of teaching on a spiritual path, on a religious path, and how they get mixed into questions of authority and trust, independence, and Messianism is the last topic that we're speaking about now. There's something about the Messianic agenda or the Messianic drive that demands a certain level of independence. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about that, because the Hasidic paradigm and the guru student paradigm in general, or teacher-student paradigm, is where there's a center of authority, of knowledge, of spiritual power, and then there's the recipient of that. But the question is, what if we're trying to create a Messianic reality? Is that a relationship which is able to bring about that reality? That's kind of the question which I want to explore next.
Well, first I have to ask about your assumption that if the Messianic movement what's Messianism in Judaism, what's the role in it in Hasidic movement? Because your assumption is that the Hasidic movement wants to be a part from the Messianic effort. It's a Chabadic assumption.
Well. So
because I would say that I just want to say that well, you do have the Besht, right? We talk about it. Igeret HaBesht, יפוצו מעיינותיך החוצה, right?
The letter that he writes to his brother-in-law about meeting the Messiah.
Exactly. Right. And the Messiah, in this letter, he writes about how he met the Messiah. And he asked him, when are you coming? And he said, כשיפוצו מעיינותיך החוצה, when your springs will, how do you say it?
Be spread out.
The other side of the phrase is חוצה מה שלימדתי אותך, like outside, spread outside.
Beyond what I taught you.
Beyond what I taught you. So this is a question of what's this beyond, right? The beyond more people, as much as the world can, I don't know, all the world, or chutza, I don't know what this chutza exactly, what's this beyond. But if I put this aside, so we do have this question of whether the Chasidism keep the Messianic, drive. Gershom Shalom.
Sure.
Yeah, so Gershom Shalom, one of the biggest Kabbalah scholars, he said that there is some kind of sublimation of the Messianic drive. And suddenly you have it in Chabad, it's the center of the work of the last rabbi. So it's quite confusing, and this whole question of whether the Hasidic movement wants to bring the Messiah, or maybe they want to go inner to the individuals and say, you're part of the Messianic effort, but in a very, very individual way.
Right.
Not in a way of maybe other people would say tikkun olam,
right.
like bringing the world for a better phase or something.
Right.
So this is one question about Messianism that, like, we must ask ourselves.
So that's the first question of whether there is a genuine Messianism and what is the Messianism amongst the Chassidic movement.
Yeah, I have another one.
Is there a second question?
Yeah, there is a second
I feel like
question.
There was a second one there.
There's all. I just thought this morning about Shabtai Tzvi. You know, we had this Jewish attempt for bringing the Messiah.
Right, the great Jewish heretical Messiah.
Radical or heretical. Yeah, exactly. So we had this kind of experiment, right, of motivation, of like this burst, explosion of, you know, this also the audience. You know, we don't have people erased, you know, the all the letters and all, you know, we don't know the amount of influence he had, but we can imagine. Okay, Bashevi Zinger is writing about this. He had a lot of influence.
Right.
People wanted to לחזור בתשובה, to become closer to God. They really thought that this is happening, and
it was huge.
Yeah, it was really, really big story, and also it's a very big shame, I think, upon this. Like, what happened? How could we follow this false Messiah? But what I was thinking this morning is the relationship between Shabtai Tzvi and Natan Azati. In a way,
Nathan of Gaza, his primary disciple.
Exactly, and he's not only a disciple and a student of him, and like he follows him and he writes about him. In a way, he manifested him as a Messiah.
Right.
He had very large role in this story of Messiah. You had this potential things that Shabtai Tzvi had from biographical point of view and from, I don't know, I'm not sure from Kabbalistic, you know, knowledge, if he had some kind of new Torah to bring. He had his take, right? But I think that a big role, Natan Azati had really big role in this game. The Messiah, the student and the teacher and Messianism historically are very heavy questions.
Right. It's almost like the relationship. It's almost like Nathan is to Shabtai what Paul is to Jesus in some sense.
Yeah, except Paul, you know, he has this moral, you know, things. You have a lot of, it is. I'm not sure. I cannot. You're the expert here from the journal.
To the extent that there's sort of the Messianic lone figure who's having their mystical visions and having their, you know, vision for a greater world. And then there's the person who is actually doing their marketing and their PR and spreading the good word.
It's more than PR, because Nathan from Gaza, he was like, you know, a theology master. He wrote a lot about it. I think he did not only the PR work, he also did the internal, you know, manifestation of the theology of Shabtaut.
Right.
So he had a big role in it. And it is a question, like, whether the imaginative Messiah will have students, will have what's happening there. Like, if you take the Jewish traditional, you know, even not in Chasidism, the Jewish traditional role of the rabbi and his followers. So whether the Messiah will be, you know, this kind of rabbi-like figure.
Right.
It goes back to the Rambam and the figure of who is exactly the Messiah.
Right. Okay, so we're opening up some very broad questions here.
Yeah.
We're opening up some very broad questions about Messianism in general, different types and figures of Messiah and their relationship to the disciples, which is an important theme for our conversation here. Maybe let's take two of these questions separately. The first question of the role and place of Messianism in Hasidic thought, in Chasidism, and then the models and how that manifests in relation to their students.
Mm-hmm.
Let's deal with those separately. I think that on the first point, there's been some later scholarship since Shalom. Shalom kind of devalued the place of Messianism in the Hasidic world. He called it the neutralization of Messianism. I think work by Idel and others have shown that it wasn't so much a neutralization, but more of an interiorization, right? As you were saying, it's not so much about tikkun olam, to fix the world as a whole, but it's some sort of inner process in the microcosm, which then does obviously affect and relate to the macrocosm. And I don't know, it could be that I'm reading the Hasidic corpus through the Chabad lens, so I'm imposing that upon it. But Idel does draw this line from Avalafia and onwards of the internal messianic redemption, that we redeem ourselves. The world is a very big place to fix. And if we can fix ourselves, then in some sense we're fixing our world. Do you see that as a theme, perhaps, as across, to find some middle ground here, as a theme across the Hasidic traditions?
I think yes, and I think that's the reason for this is not only like it's like a development, natural development, like a tree, you know. It's not just a natural development of ideas throughout history. I think it's also connected to the fact that Hasidic movement is a modern movement.
Right.
And this shift, we often forget it because we are in the modern, you know, point of time, you know. I had a teacher, Yoni Garb. She's a big scholar of Kabbalah, and he always talked about the fact we tend to look on texts from our point of view back,
right,
and we forget that we're also part of this revolution of the modern world. So
sure.
for us, like talking about the self, fixing the person is fixing the larger world. All these things are new, and I think the Hasidic movement, it's kind of a reaction, or it's a reflection of the whole, you know, modern period in which the questions are not about the world. Like, what can you say about the world? The world it's not only big, it's uncontrolled. It's I don't know if it's a despair from the world or what is it exactly, but it's not a despair from the world, כמו שזה an emphasis of the self.
Right.
So the self becomes an issue.
Right.
And a big thing. And the self of the tzaddik and the self of the, you know, all the romantic also movement, right? People in Germany, they look on the trees, but they, you know, it's a manifestation of their own thoughts and inner world. So you have it in literature also in the same period of time, in another place. But so what I want to say is that I kind of agree with Idel and how the way you presented it, that it's an internal Messiah, but it's not just internal in the way we think about it. It's, you know, I feel I'm the Messiah and I am redeemed myself and that's it. It's a belief. It's much more radical. It's a belief that by doing this, you are redempting, or there is you're taking part in this Messianic movement.
Right.
And
it's interesting. It's definitely important to not do anachronistic readings of history, to know that we are in a certain point in history and there's certain conceptions. I'm slightly, I don't want to get too much into a tangent because I want to focus on the question of leader and disciple here in the Messianic context, and what that may mean for us if we can try and bridge that gap. But I think sometimes this the argument that it's only in modernity that we turn to the self, to the inner, sometimes overlooks texts like Plotinus's Enneads and Plato's Republic, where the cosmic and divine drama, you know, for Plotinus, the one, the nous and soul are actually happening inside the self as well. So
you don't buy this theory.
I don't know. It's important.
You're not the only one. The Ramak also is writing a lot about himself, right? He writes some kind of Cordovero, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero from Sfat. He writes this beautiful explanation about the upper worlds, the worlds, the God, everything. And then he says, Begufi hava, like, I'm talking about this, I know it's from my own body. Like this kind of, suddenly in the middle of the book you have this phrase. So you do have this, you know, the way they looked, and the self exists before the modernity, right? So, and also the self-reflection. So we do have this. It's like Freud didn't invent the, I don't know how to say, the psyche, the soul.
The psyche.
Yeah. The ego. He didn't invent the ego, he just talk about it.
Right. Yeah, so it's a true point. I guess the question then is the degree of emphasis, or how central it becomes. So we found some common ground here, that in the Hasidic movement across Chasidism there is a messianic tendency and direction, but it's one which is internal, one which is a redemption which one reaches in themselves, what the mystics call a geula pratit, a personal, private redemption, which then has these ripple effects, these ramifications, these hashlachot in reality around.
Well, you know, Breslov, I can't avoid Breslov because I come from like 5 years of learning and thinking about Breslov. So when I think about Breslov, I think about things saying of Rabbi Nachman, האש שלי תוקד עד ימות המשיח. My fire will be, lightened will burn until the Messiah will come. And although from Yiddish it's funny because he say Tluen, and Tluen is, as I understand it, it's kind of, it's not burning fire, it's like this sparkles fire. And I don't know why Rabbi Natan and his followers kind of thought that the translation should be האש שלי תבער עד ימות המשיח. I think it's a different picture of, the fire or, sparkles.
Interesting.
But if I go back to Breslov, one of the interesting things we have that Rabbi Nachman said that the Messiah will learn his book, Likutei Moharan. So the Messiah will be, if we talk about the student and the teacher, it breaks all this, what the things we imagine. This is why I asked before, when we imagine the Messiah, is he a teacher?
Right.
This is just a funny and interesting question to think of. And in this saying of Rabbi Nachman, he's not the teacher, he's kind of a student of Rabbi Nachman because he learns his book. He learns Likutei Moharan, which is Rabbi Nachman's book. It's kind of disturbing to think.
It's interesting. Rabbi Nachman had a lot of, it's interesting that you bring this up, he had a lot of very enigmatic sayings specifically about the Messianic figure at the end of times. Some very bizarre statements. There's...
Well, bizarre, it's kind of judgment.
Judgment? How would you describe them? You know what I'm referring to. He speaks about the Messiah as coming and wearing strange hats and strange...
From Megillat Starim, meaning Megillat Starim.
Yeah.
Well, there is this text that was revealed lately, right? It's some kind of text that was, because of historical reasons, Breslov Hasidim always censored their texts. And this was a text that Tzvi Mark has revealed. And he opened it up, and it was coded, and he kind of opened it up, Megillat Starim, which is a very important work. And in this work, Rabbi Nachman describes the Messiah, and it's so interesting to see the description, which is some kind of a young man who he's not, it's interesting what he's not. He's not a big scholar and he's not a big rabbi. He's just a person who moves from a community to community with kind of musical band or something, and he, with this music, through music, he uses the to waken up people. And there's, I don't remember a thing with hats. But
he says that he'll be a child.
You're a child, but it's not the only one who thought about the Messiah as a child, right?
The
child
is a motif that comes earlier,
It's a motif, and the child also, you have it in the tarot cards. Okay, let's go to a far away theme, right? When you have a child, it's not a child, right? It's the upper soul. It's something spiritual.
The archetype.
So it's an archetype.
Let's focus here on this question of teacher and student and Messiah and disciple. What relationships? So, if we can agree that the Hasidic movement is trying to do something messianic in their own way, they're not trying to do the biblical form of messianism or even the rabbinic or even the Kabbalistic. That there's their own form of messianism, a very spiritualized, internal, mystical form of messianism, we can say. What is the relationship there that we're seeing in Hasidic movements between the Rebbe and Chasid, between the teacher and follower, when it comes to this question of Messianism? Maybe you'll share the Breslov and I'll try and chime in on the Chabad side.
It's always good. I'm thinking of the broader, thing that we see is, I think about Seudah Shlishit. One of the moments which are like the most important things, moments in which rabbis delivered their speech, some kind of spiritual, mystical, drasha and speech to their audience was in Shabbat. And I think it's not...
Seudah Shlishit is the third meal of Shabbat, which is Shabbat late afternoon, which is considered a very, very important spiritual time for the mystics.
Yeah, and we see, I think it's not it's not accidental that they talk on Shabbat, because I think they view Shabbat as some kind of mini of Olam Haba, the world to come.
Right, the Messianic period, right.
Exactly. It's not exactly the Messianic period, right? The Olam Haba, it's Tchiyat HaMetim. You had this like a Jewish division between the Messianic, the Messiah will come, wars maybe. You know, you have all kinds of pictures of, the end. The
Jewish eschatology.
Yeah, Jewish eschatology is full of pictures, but you do have some sense. Shabbat is connected in the Hasidic movement to this to the upper world, to the world, Ken Olam Haba, Olam Shiavo, and I think that we can see also a lot of. They talk about themselves delivering the drasha, delivering the talk, not only in front of their audience, their physical audience, but also in front of like kind of Elyonim or all kinds of,
celestial beings, angels.
Well, this is the English works, celestial beings. So I think this is beautiful idea, and this is exactly, means that in a way they feel they are at the moment in the world, like they experience themselves in creating this kind of small Messianic moment.
Right.
There's something that I'm thinking about, like a question I deal with. Sorry. I have a question with, when I have a lot of friends. I want to say something personal.
Sure, please.
Al Mashiachiyut, on Messianism. So when I divide my friends, all kinds of divisions. One of the divisions I like to do only in my head. They don't know. Most of them don't know about it.
They're about to know.
They're about to know. Why they don't know. They won't get this far in them. But one of the divisions that I tend to do is between people that have this character or drive, Messianic drive, and those who are not.
Yes.
Well, I consider myself as one of those who don't have this.
Interesting.
I
consider myself someone who does have it.
Who does
very
have.
Much so, yeah.
Well, usually a lot of my friends, my spouse, my teacher, a lot of people around me. And because I'm not like this, I'm looking at them. And what I see, it's also, there's three elements. It's not scientific.
It sounds like a science.
It's not a science at all. You can move it off the blog. It's not interesting. But I just want to share that. One is the assumption that something is changing in history of time. We're now in the end of something. We're standing on the cliff. We're not on this line, and we're not on the normal timeline. Something has happened.
Oh,
we are on the edge of something. A tragedy, ecological. Something is going to happen, or a war is about to happen, or a war is already happened.
It's a very imminent sense of a rupture, of end of times.
It's a personal vision of something. It could be. It doesn't have to be. A real war. It could be like, we're in the middle of intellectual war against X or Y. This is one.
Right.
Okay, this is the vision of kind of a war that's happening. Two is the idea of we have to do something. Something is have to be done. Right. It's not like a despair, because you could also say something is happening in the world and whatever.
Right.
Okay, this is where I'm kind of standing. Yeah, but somebody is have to do. We have a potential here of fixing.
There's a sense of responsibility to participate.
Is three. Yeah, still you don't have. Well, I don't know. You could think, I wish that somebody will take responsibility. But third is to say, I'm the only one who can do it.
Wow.
This is a switch.
Oh, this is a very extreme form of messianism that your friends and partner are manifesting.
I have quite. I can.
That they themselves have to do something about the situation.
Well. They don't scream in the middle of Jerusalem, I'm the Messiah, right? They don't do it.
Right.
But in a way, they it turns their head of thinking like, what is the thing? What can I do here to fit into history, to leave the mark on the history?
Right.
And sometimes it goes with capitalistic. It doesn't have to be with religious emotions or feelings or thoughts or beliefs.
Right.
I think that you have this, messianic character in, I don't know, maybe you could be a vegetarian activist.
Right, you could be a communist, a Marxist, a socialist.
Exactly. And I think this is, and going back to communism, when we started the talk, I told you about the journey I'm doing with my own personal family background. And when I just looked without prejudice, without any, former paradigms on the beginning of the revolution, of the communist revolution, and what I saw is a lot of individuals, when I'm reading the texts that people wrote, they really believed that they're standing in the end of one world, bad one, pogroms, misjustice, I don't know, not injustice, and they stand in the front of another world, but they have the a role.
Yes.
They have a role, personal role in this thing. So they were willing to give up upon a lot of things they had, like the shtetl and the language and the Yiddish, because they gave up upon those things, and then they could join the revolution.
Yes.
Well, it was a bad decision, but
I'm curious why
it was a messianic.
Why do you not include yourself in that camp? Which of those points?
It's a matter of character. It's not a belief. I think this is what I'm saying. Like having this kind of thought. I think that this is, in a way, it's a character.
Right.
I think you'll find people who are not having this character going more to the literature, like running away to like spheres when you don't have real activism, but you have just a description of the inner processes that are happening.
Right.
You have this artistic. I'm more in the artist. Well, maybe you can split. This is a very strange world view, but maybe I am splitting the world, like Messianic people and artistic people. I don't know.
I mean, that's interesting, because I do know a lot of artists or people that are artistic that are also messianic. And
I'm sure you do. It's not a real theory,
and for them their art is a form of manifestation, or a form of trying to evoke something from their own consciousness or from those around them. But let's talk about us for a second.
No, but this is this maybe Hasidic arts, but like the arts and its pure manifestation. It's only like an amusement, you do it.
Why?
No, I don't. For the art.
I think if someone's an activist and they're protesting against climate change and they make a big mural as a form of art, I think that's both art and messianic in a sense.
There's something about it. Yes.
Let's talk about us for a second here, because this is interesting. So you're in the position of a scholar who's doing a descriptive work. You're describing what's happening amongst these movements. You're not prescribing. You're not saying how people should act or how the world should be, right?
No, in any way.
And you're not interested in doing that from what you're saying. So
it's the opposite. As much as they do the strangest thing and they write the strangest theology, I gain from it. Well, it sounds bad, but I gain for it because it's more interesting for me, like to look at what's happening.
Right. And you are a teacher. You're actively teaching in multiple institutions here.
Mm-hmm.
In your role, and you're teaching about the relationship between a teacher and a disciple, a teacher and students.
Yeah.
Particularly in messianic and mystical contexts.
Yes. So it's not a theme, right? But we can't avoid it. So we kind of...
Right. It's there if you're going to be teaching.
It's there.
I'm curious in what way, and maybe the answer is in no way, but I'm curious in what way, if any, does it impact your own understanding of your own role as a teacher and your own relationship to your students?
Wow. I think it's the opposite. I would never want my students to think I'm, a mediator to God or a manifestation of God's words or something. In a way, I don't know. I think they would like to do it. I don't know. Well, now not, because they already know me. Like, maybe in the beginning, I know when they hear mysticism, a teacher, I don't know what they imagine. But once they get to know me, I think that the most important thing for me is to stay free, also to speak freely and to speak, well, freely meaning without, in a way, without this responsibility of representing, of educating. I don't know if I'm the best example for educators. This is why I didn't go to school yet. I don't know, maybe I'll go to school and to teach smaller children. I think it's complicated. Yes, I think that we as the teachers, we as students, maybe we want our teacher to be in this kind of role.
Right.
And once he or she breaks it, it's kind of, it's confusing.
Right. Because they're no longer filling that divine role, the person who's giving us wisdom, the person who, they just become a human like us.
And they feel like neglected in the world without anybody, you know, guiding them.
Right.
And I think this is a very good starting point as a human to feel neglected in the world.
you think that's a good
this is
place?
the beginning.
Right.
This beginning. Right. I don't want to sound, you know, like guru-like people. You know, they always the Eastern. The Eastern gurus always, you know, you had to, when you learn yoga. Not you. I didn't learn yoga in the East, right? But they live with the teacher for 20 years in stories, right? They live with the teacher 20 years in Buddhism, and then after this, he tells them, "Okay, let's start learning. Okay, now you finished all this, you know, Buddhist tales about how people develop." And this is actually a major theme there, but I think they look at it in a more free way than us.
I'm getting almost like a Nietzschean sense from you. That
that
you want to do away with authority, don't like be on your own. There's like quite an existential, like stand on your own 2 feet.
Yeah.
Yes, is that fair?
Kind of, yeah, something like this. And also, I think we didn't discuss gender, but I think it's a major issue here. We have to remember that throughout history, when we look on the theme of initiation. Yeah, and teaching throughout history and the written history, we see that most of the relationships would be between rabbi and students, male rabbi and male students.
Right.
And I think that with the feminist changes and feminist movement, so I think we should broaden our understanding of what's teaching and what's knowledge and what's getting knowledge.
Right.
And for example, you know, when you see women who start to talk and they apologize before, I'm sorry, I'm not sure, I don't know. So there is this feminist saying of saying, don't apologize, do it like a man, go on the stage, be unprepared and just say your thing. This is how they have done it all the history, and now it's our turn. But I look at this in the opposite. Like I'm grateful to have the ability to apologize and to be humble. So it gives a certain bad show to the audience, but I don't care.
That's very fascinating. You're saying that the way that the feminine style of teaching, feminine form of teaching versus the masculine is one which is inherently embraces a humility and a uncertainty and the capacity to admit doubt. I'm guessing you'd say that both biological men, both men and women, could both be teaching in a feminine or masculine character, right? It's not restricted.
Yeah, I don't agree with this kind of saying that this is a feminine, this is masculine. I think that this is a side that this is what we see in history. This is what we see. Like the teacher, he teaches the knowledge. The students are capturing, like they are maybe like the feminine side. They're like receiving the knowledge, and they don't have.
Kabbalists, they're certainly the feminine.
Exactly, and they don't have an opinion. Well, you see, people are really rude nowadays, and this is very blessed. It's a big blessing. Everybody is rude. Everybody has the internet. If something is not interesting, you can switch to another podcast, you know. And I think that we must, you know, think on different methods, different things. But we have to remember that still the idea of somebody who is a guru and telling you how to live precisely, taking your money, taking your freedom, it exists.
Right. Sure.
I'm not saying this like we're on the real path, a new path, and everything is changing. Right. No, you have all kinds of voices still.
But you're saying with the feminist movement, there is the capacity for a new model of teaching.
I'm hoping so. I'm kind of.
Right.
I have a hope.
You're seeing it to some degree.
I don't know. All my education, world, was in the Israeli universities, in which still my field of Kabbalah is captured with a lot of, this classic figures.
Is it changing now these days?
It's changing. You do have professors, like I was in a class of Rachel Elior, and there's a very, very also important scholar named Ada Rappaport, Ada Albert Rappaport, and she passed away about a year and a half. And Ada was like this. I remember Ada I remember Ada wrote about Breslov Hasidism, and she lived in London. And I arrived to London just to visit the family, and I wrote to Ada with big respect, and I'm sorry, Professor Rappaport Albert, I know you're busy, but maybe you'll have some kind of time to drink tea wherever you like. I will come to. Okay. And then she sent me this email. Well, what date you're flying back to Israel? Let's sit together on the plane. And I think it was, for me as a student, I never received this kind of email from any of my teachers. Right. Okay, let's do. When are you fly? I don't know actually nothing about their personal life, well, except gossip or things. But I don't know Well, now I do, because I'm kind of. It took me a lot of years. Well, now I do, but in that stage where I were, it was the end of the second degree, the beginning of the PhD. I didn't. Nobody knew me. I don't know. It was very, and her reaction was beautiful.
Did you end up catching the flight with her?
No, it was a different time. It was a different time, and I didn't saw her in this visit.
Yeah. Because
she was rushing to fly to Israel back, and we didn't catch one another. But when she came to Israel, not so much time after, I kind of followed her in every lecture she gave in the north and every place, and she was so generous and nice. And I thought that from Hasidic point of view, from also academic point of view, but also from a feminist point of view, it gave me a lot. The ability to be such a great scholar and also be in touch with the students. And the same I can say about Rachel Elior. Which I met only few weeks ago, and we shared chocolate, and and she was the teacher and I was a student. Right. Actually met Rachel Elior before, after 2 weeks when I studied in Shalem. So I felt suddenly, this is interesting. When I I just now realized the connections, but when a person, give birth to a woman, sometimes in the room when she gives birth, she's she needs her mom. Well, she not the real mom actually there. Doesn't always work, but suddenly figure. You're a child. You're reborn as a mother, but you also become the daughter again, and you understand what it means to be it's a very strange moment, very strange moment, and beautiful moment. And when I started to teach in Shalem, I didn't seek for any guidance from my teachers. But after a few weeks, I suddenly started calling Yonatan Meir, Rachel Elior, which I haven't spoke for a few years. And then I called her and wanted to ask to meet with her, because I needed this kind of connection between. I couldn't imagine myself as a teacher without staying a student of somebody.
Yes.
So
that's fascinating.
This is something that is very, very deep, I think, in the idea of being a teacher, is also the ability to see yourself as a student also.
Right. This is really fascinating. And you've also connected up now those themes that we connected before earlier between the parent and the teacher, right? The Talmudic discussion there. And those are related here. I want to try and do something. I want to try and stay in the present moment with the characters that we're speaking of, and comment on that, and also try bridge back to the Hasidic movement and see what might be happening with these themes of femininity and maternality, teaching students Messianism. We'll go there in a second. I already know that you know what I'm hinting at there. In the present moment, I mean, if we think it's interesting for me, my experience here now, meeting all of these wonderful scholars, including yourself, where I think if this podcast would have been done 50 years ago, I mean, there wouldn't have been a podcast, but 20 years ago, there probably wouldn't have been many women sitting in the seat you are today. And I've had the chance, the incredible, beautiful opportunity to meet incredible scholars like Melilla, Helner Eshed, like Bitty Roy, like Ruth Kara Kanikov, like who else has sat with us? Yourself. And it's for me, it's been a wonderful experience, and I do hope to get in touch with more of the scholars of Jewish mysticism here, people like Chaviva Ptaya and others who I hope to be able to sit down with as well. And what I'm noticing amongst those scholars, and I think it's not only amongst the women, but it's also a tendency which is now spreading to the men to some extent, where there's a rich openness and engagement with the ideas that they're talking about. It's not just some abstract, distant, what we would see as masculine, as sort of far away, let's look at this like it's some sort of dead animal that we're dissecting. But these are these ideas that we're living with, and we're not dissecting them. We're vivifying them, and they're vivifying us. We're giving them life, and they're giving us life.
Really, you see this in the feminine.
I tell you, I saw this. I've been. If I can single out one scholar,
let's go. Spill some tea. This is how you say it.
Yeah, but really as a representation of the rest of the women here and the men as well, is Professor. She would hate if I called her Professor, but is Melilla Helner Eshed, who's a brilliant scholar of Zohar, of the Idrot, of a tremendous scholar, but I feel like I'm in the presence of a mystic when I'm around her, and I feel with her that if I'm having a hard day and things are rough and I'm worried about like petty things and ego things, I see Melilla and it kind of just falls away. I hear her voice and it falls away, and she has this way of just grabbing people physically, taking hold of people and connecting them with one another. She's like, Zevi, meet this person, you got to meet each other, and she just brings people together. She just is connecting worlds in her. And she invited me over to her house. There was a session that she studies Zohar with a group ready for 20 years with Professor Yehuda Liebes.
Wow, this is magical group.
It was magical. It was absolutely magical. And I think it's interesting that you were distinguishing between authority and sort of openness to doubt. And I think with Melilla, for example, and with the other scholars here, with Bitty, with Ruth, I feel a tremendous amount of authority. I feel like they're not lacking authority. And I don't feel like there's a lack of knowledge any less than the male scholars, but I feel like there's a certain, this is like a cheapened word these days, but there's like an embodiment of it where it's in them and it's speaking through them. It's not just their like cerebral cortex firing off words. It's like their entire being.
And you don't think the men scholar you interviewed here are the same?
Some. I think some of them. I think that, like what you're saying, that the feminist tone is not only affecting women, it's affecting men as well. And I think particularly here at Hartman, there may be a certain demographic that's being attracted here because of that. And I think with certain, here I won't say names, but I think with certain of the men scholars, there is that presence of teaching through their being, of it being an existential encounter. Menachem Loberbaum, Professor Loberbaum, again, he wouldn't let me call him professor, where it was like a deep encounter. But still, I felt like it was still first abstraction and then encounter.
I think it's a matter of tone. I must disagree. I have to disagree here because nothing from what we've talked here is similar to what I do in class. I'm kind of happy this podcast is in English and they're really lazy and won't hear it because in class we talk, about dates, about history, about the politics, about texts, about and of course I'd never share. They don't know anything about me, so I'm kind of so I'm not sure I fit into this. We should be careful doing this, image of this alternative feminine teaching and its characters, and these are the characters.
We're being a bit too stereotypical, a bit too essentialistic,
and this is Mahut, it's like every woman will have something of this, and the men, we suspect, we we pre-think. Yes, if it's a man, I suspect that he won't be this way, and a woman, she will be this way. I'm kind of more gender, maybe the audience also. I'm not sure I share the same understandings as you, and all those people that you mentioned are teachers of mine. Yeah, and of course Melila and Biti and all those people. This is a question. This is a big question.
It's fascinating. This is the second time you brought up a paradigm of women teaching, and I went along with it, and then you said, "Oh, I don't know."
I'm sorry, I don't know.
I'm just following along here.
In your words, it sounds, maybe it's because of the language barrier. I don't know. It doesn't sound.
No, but I appreciate between the back and forth we can find we cannot make any strong gender
what would you do
stereotypes.
if you had this, I don't know, perhaps big teacher, a lot of scholars, and she said, I don't know, I don't want to talk about anything existential. Is she worthy, like her voice?
Yes. Well, I don't tell anyone how to show up, and I don't. Maybe I expect them to show up in a certain way. That's my own prejudices, which I have to keep in check. But I want people to show up as they are, and I want to be able to allow people to show up as they are, and to not impose my own expectations upon them.
Well, it is interesting. Would you ask a man scholar, what his background? When did he first started to learn the text?
I do. I asked the men that question as well.
Interesting.
One question which I found myself asking the women scholars here, and I thought about it for a second whether it's an appropriate question or not. I asked them what it's been like as a woman teaching.
It is, of course.
Because I didn't ask the men what it's like as a man to be teaching.
Well, men is default,
Right.
Not really.
Right. This is de Beauvoir's
We are
idea.
just, the abnormal thing that we
The
have to
woman
explain
is the
ourselves all
other.
the time.
Right.
We have to explain.
Is that an improper question to ask a woman what it's like to be teaching in a male-dominated space such as Jewish studies?
It's a very, very good
Okay,
question. We deal with this question all the time. Well, the woman doesn't have to answer if she doesn't want, but it's a very big question. Of course. This is why if you go back to my stories, is looking for missing Ada so much and looking for the presence of Rachel Elior during the only this month is what's happening to me. I think it's because the absence of women scholar, and especially in the field of Chasidism, it's very it's very sad, but I think it's changing because it has to change. It won't stay there for long.
Right.
You have in Bar-Ilan Lior Zaks Shmueli. I want you to meet her. She's not part of the Machon, but I'll give you the contact.
Pleasure.
Yeah. She's very interesting. That. Yeah. She's really important also.
I do want to bridge this over to the historical side. I felt like it was a bit of a masculine thing to do, to move away from the present moment to the historical moment.
No, I think it's okay. It's also feminine. It's okay. It's really okay.
Break down the binaries. What do you see, either in practice or in theory, this question of teaching as a male activity versus a feminine activity in the Hasidic movement, particularly in the Rebbe, Chasid, the leader, follower dynamic, and if it has any relationship to Messianism. I mean, of
this
course.
Is complicated. I don't know if we can also add the Maskilot here. I'm not sure it's connected.
I think it is connected.
It is.
But
why?
Because part of, at least in Chabad thought, part of the Messianic vision is the ascent of the feminine. Is the ascent of Malchut to Keter. The student becomes teacher.
I see. Yeah, it is. I see in this way.
But maybe let's hold that for a second and we'll just talk about...
Yeah, in Chabad you have this thing. That's interesting. Well, you think about, Tzipi Koifman, also important scholar who also passed away, and she was teaching Bar-Ilan, and she wrote a lot about the Shekhinah and a lot of themes connected to traditionally to women as mikveh, and then the womb and all kinds of things in the Hasidic stories and in the Hasidic Torahs and Drashot. And she talked about how sometimes...
So you're saying that the archetype of womb and a ritual bath were associated with the feminine.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Mikveh, it's a ritual bath. This is how you will say. Sometimes you have the translations like so good and like it's
sometimes the translations
celestial. You say, okay, they captured something, but then you say like visual bass, really?
Yeah. Sometimes the translations are less helpful than the original.
Yeah.
It's like when we translate tefillin into phylacteries. I think both words are equally meaningless to a non-Hebrew audience. Go on. So you're saying?
So I'm thinking about the things Tzipi Kaufman was teaching about how rabbis sometimes took a language of Chasid of things connected to women to describe their own spiritual experiences.
Right.
So you have this kind of experience connected to women inside. You have themes connected to women inside Hasidic texts.
Sure.
You have those things. But another interesting point of view is to understand that the tzaddik became also a person, especially in Poland and in Poland and in the third, fourth, and 20th century also generation. You have a lot of women coming to the tzaddik and asking about the things they need, and sometimes they need to have a baby and they struggle, they have problems with fertility.
Right.
And of course we know nowadays from scientific point of view, yes, they don't have these fertility problems. It could be nobody or half their partner.
Right.
But then in the history it was considered like their problem.
Right.
So they came to the tzaddik and he gave him a blessing.
Right.
And it was, I think, a very interesting moment in which the tzaddik was connecting to this feminine, historical feminine, need in his community. And this connection between the tzaddik and the woman inside the community is important, because when we read Maskilot, how do you say?
Jewish Enlightenment
texts, we can see as in a beautiful song called Be'akise, like the toilet, actually, like if I translate it. You can see, let's say, of the Maskilot, Dov Ber Levinson. He wrote this poem about a rabbi sitting in the Seudah Shlishit, in the third meal in Shabbat, which we earlier mentioned as the most holy moment.
Yeah.
And he kind of he describes a great big amount of women coming to the tzaddik and saying, please help us, we need a child. And then he helps them in a kind of, he helps them physically, in kind of disappropriate, manner. So inappropriate manner. So you see the criticize of the inner Jewish world to this connection between the tzaddik and the feminine side in the community.
Fascinating. And
we can look on this from this Maskilot maybe criticizing point of view, but then what I read here is actual connection between this part in the society which is left in the traditional world, is left aside. We see here is some kind of connection between the tzaddik and women. So it's not feminist at all. It's not a feminine leadership. It's not Sarah Schneerer, who was inner leader, like woman leader in the Jewish traditional world, but you do see here understanding that women are part of the community and are part of the spiritual work of the tzaddik.
Right. So they're not.
He counts them.
They're not neglected.
Yeah.
From the responsibilities or role that the tzaddik or the Rebbe faces.
Still, it's not feminist at all.
Right.
At all.
Right.
But it's something. It's something interesting to look at.
And the Maskilim, who are classic critics of their religious compatriots, are poking fun and insinuating that there's sexual impropriety between the Rebbe and the female leadership. There are some very rare exceptions of women who are leaders, who are Rebbes in the Chassidic community, but those are really, really very much exceptions that prove the rule. They're 1 in 1,000.
Yeah, you have the story of the Betula Miludmir, you
Yes,
know, this
yeah.
who moved to Jerusalem and she didn't want to get married again, and she went to live here. And according to what we know, she had a group of followers. The thing with historiography that we know only about what was written, you know, and we don't know about, we kind of lost all the oral tradition, the oral history also. So meaning we don't know about women that had, you know, a court or something Hasidic of this kind, but I don't know, maybe
there may
was.
have been more.
This is only what we know. And when we see today, we also see, you know, the I forgot her name, the wife of the Belzer Rabbi, the current Belzer Rabbi. She gives blessing to people until nowadays, and she's the one who gives the blessing.
Interesting.
She doesn't take the people and say, okay, go to my husband, go to my brother. She says she gives the blessing, and she gives the blessing as I know it to women and men.
Interesting.
So you have, and also like this short videos, we see that she's actually having this itvadut. She encouraged the Chassidim to sing. With like, you know, this Chassidic, you know, hand thing, and she's like in the middle, and she's standing in the head of the table.
She's feared in Tish, as we would say. She's running the
she's running the Tish. She's running it. She has this also very interesting hat she wears. I think she's a very interesting figure.
Interesting. I haven't heard of this at all.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I'm curious. So we do see responsibility interaction between the Rebbe and the female Chasid.
Yeah.
And they're certainly part of the community, particularly as we're saying when it comes to questions of fertility. Although it's not being done at all as you're saying in a way that's feministic in the way that we would conceptualize that today. Is there a way in which because the teacher-student relationship, according to just about all of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalists in particular, is a relationship between the giver and the recipient, and every giver and recipient is characterized as masculine and feminine, right? The same way.
Not always. You have also the Moshe Yeshua, you know, Elisha, and you have all kinds of models. It's not always masculine and feminine.
Okay, what are you seeing in those models?
Well, I see in these models just the idea of somebody who's not receiving, but also like the receiver is never just a receiver. If you think about the Ari, right?
Rabbi Isaac Luria, the 16th century.
Yes, so it's cool. You have to like, it's funny. Rabbi Isaac Luria. No, you're right. It's important. So we see that Hari didn't write he was the teacher, no questions.
Sure.
The students called themselves Gurei Ha'ari.
Yes.
The puppies, how to say
the cubs. The lion cubs,
This is great. The cubs of the lion.
I like puppies better though.
No, the cubs of the lion. So they saw themselves as the cubs. So no doubt he was the teacher,
sure.
the great master, but still he didn't write. He did the text were written by a student, Rabbi Chaim Vital. So we see that, and the text also, you know, he was buried with the text, and his son, Rabbi Shmuel, I think, he went to Egypt and opened. There was this whole story. I don't remember now the details, but the idea is what I want to say is that the teacher needs the student, and we have to remember this because throughout our talk we talk about the need of the student. But the fact is the teacher needs his student nonetheless.
Yes.
And he needs them not in just, you know, I don't know, some psychological, spiritual, no, like physically.
Yes.
You have teachers that didn't write anything, so we would never know about them. And
yes. There is that very rich theme that what's the saying that more than the calves need to suckle from the mother, the mother needs to give milk.
To give the milk, yeah. So this is more like a psychological, maybe, I don't know. It's like almost physical. It's interesting saying, but I'm talking about something else. I think that the students, I think they spread something that the teacher is limited, right? The teacher in the end is one person with, I don't know, maximum 120 years, like lifetime circle. But the teachers, first of all, they're different, and they're different in the ways they are different from each other. I think I saw that in Tzedkat Tzaddik book. I saw that in the one Hasidic book, a beautiful explanation
from Tzaddik HaKohen of Lublin.
Yeah, I think he was the one, Nehemiah Poland from the States. You know him from Boston, Nehemiah Poland. I think I was in a lesson where he talked about this piece in Tzedkat Tzaddik, and he was teaching about the way that Tzaddik, after his death, it's a good thing for him to have his students kind of manifesting their own way and their own understanding, because they reveal something that was kind of hidden in the teacher's thought. So it, of course, it goes back to parents-children relationship, but the students reveal something that was kind of not sharp enough or hidden in the teacher's thought. And this is also a question about Chabad, right? I'm going back to Chabad, right? Like leaving only students. What does it mean?
Right. Yes.
Like this is the gap. This is the last Chabad rabbi or the last rabbi. I don't know.
So this is something that we touched on before, and we didn't get to unpack it. And I wanted to ask you, why is it, if it's so essential, the relationship between the teacher and student, between the Rebbe and Chasid, is clearly so essential on many levels, physically, spiritually, existentially, psychologically, materially even. Why is it that and the student, as you're saying, is never just a student. The student becomes the teacher to the next generation, right? We spoke about, you mentioned Moses and Joshua, right? Where Moses is described as the sun and Joshua as the moon, who receives and reflects light. But then Joshua passes on that light to the elders, and then from them to the judges, and then to the prophets, and all the way down, right?
Yeah.
So student becomes teacher, becomes like they're integral in that relationship. Why is it that in certain Hasidic movements we see an exception from the rule, where there isn't a direct line of succession made, where the teacher says, this student or child of mine or son-in-law of mine, again, typically the masculine, is now going to be the next teacher for the next generation? Why do we, because in most cases we do see that being done emphatically. Why in the case, we've been discussing here Chabad and Breslov, but you're welcome to cue in anyone else as well. Why are they not passing on the mantle? It seems like such a core part of
most of them
their
do.
responsibility.
I think most of them
do.
Most of them do.
Of course.
Right? You think of Vishnets, you think about, I don't know.
Right. These are dynastic movements that are passing on the leadership, passing on the authority.
You know, they not always pass it to the son. Maybe they pass it to the son-in-law.
Right.
Yeah, they have this also. You know, we had all kinds of historic, sons that were receiving the role and didn't do it quite good. So you have this also. The last rabbi of Chabad is not the son, right?
Son-in-law.
He's a son-in-law.
But in those instances that it's not being passed down, do you have an inclination of why it's not being passed on?
I'm not sure. I think it is connected to Messianism. I think it's the idea of being, the last generation, right? When I was teaching today the Ma'amar of Bati Legani of Tashiar, was the first Ma'amar that the last Rebbe of Chabad, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, said. He spoke.
First Hasidic discourse.
The first Hasidic discourse that he gave in 1950, right? So he kind of, I think you told me this, or somebody else from Chabad told me that, like, you can see in a way that he plans to be the last. The first day he delivers his Torah, you can see that he has no plans of giving the role to somebody else, even though biographically afterwards he didn't have any children, right? It's very interesting.
Why do you think that's being done?
This is how I understood, the seventh, right? The last. He's saying, he's like, repeats the fact that we are the seventh, we are people that heard him. the seventh generation. I don't know if people will agree with me, but I would say it's surely connected to the Messianic figure, the character that I spoke about. It's connected to the Holocaust. I don't know if you agree with my interpretation, but talking about the last generation, 2 years about this big trauma of the Holocaust, so I think it's connected. Like the idea of something else we have to like break history. Well, history already broken, obviously, and we must fix it, or we must, I don't know, it's like something must be. And he wasn't the only intellectual who talked about the Holocaust in this way. When we read Adorno, this intellectual who talks about culture and art, he said, Theodor Adorno, he wrote about how can you write anything. He wrote, how can you write anything about the Holocaust? Right. This is a very important cultural Western question of what is the world, what is the ideals, what is the thing we believed in, what is aesthetics, what is everything, what is time, what is history. And I'm not sure the Lubavitcher Rebbe will agree with me, but I do think that talking about the seventh generation as the last generation, 2 years after the Holocaust, when he has family, his, I think, older brother, he lost him in the Nazis when they shot him in Yekaterinostlav, Dnipropetrovsk, I think. So I think it's maybe existential low reason, but I think it's connected.
That's very interesting.
To trauma.
That's very interesting. I don't know if I've heard that made explicit before, that it was precisely the fact that time had already been ruptured by the tragedy of the Holocaust, that we were now ready for the end of time, for the Messianic in some sense. That things couldn't go on business as usual anymore. Well,
you see this also when the Lubavitcher Rebbe talks about the Holocaust, right? A lot of people are puzzled with where was God in the Holocaust, and maybe there is no God because the Holocaust exists, and a lot of people lost their faith. And but his answer is different. His answer is something like, it's not answer. He says, I'm not supposed to say the answer. God, please, itkabed, and say the answer. And when he asks God, and he says, it's not a question I'm supposed to be asked as a human being, but God should please come and explain us. So I think it also implicates the idea of the Shoah the Holocaust connected to the end of times.
Right, to a final revelation,
well,
redemption.
Now, the upper world, something else will tell us the answers to it.
Right. So I just want to tease out and make explicit the point you said just before this, which is that the idea of not creating succession, both in Breslov and Chabad, is connected to Messianism. Can you just tease out that point and elaborate for a second?
I'm not sure exactly how can I'm not sure how to express this connection. How would you say it?
I do have my own kind of theory here. You sense that
because I don't necessarily connect those things together.
Right. I'll tell you why I'm connecting them, and perhaps also
please do. This is your podcast. Zevi, you can.
No, I'm here to interview.
What is this?
I'm here to talk with the scholars. I'll tell you what, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this, and what parallel or dissonance you may see in Breslov in this regard, and also where it may intersect with the feminine specifically. I think that the whole project to bring about a messianic redemption and revolution is one which is fraught with an internal paradox, right? Because it's something which, particularly in the thought of Chabad, but also you can see across Hasidic thought and going back into Kabbalah and Midrashim, that it's something that has to be done through the power of the human, through the power of the lower, the tachton, as it's put, made it very explicit in Chabad doctrine, that it's a dira b'tachtonim. It's specifically God doesn't want to dwell in the higher worlds in Atzilut.
He doesn't need it.
Right. It's here in the physical, which is a very radical doctrine.
Yeah.
And intersects very interestingly with Gnosticism and Neoplatonism. That's a whole other discussion, which is interesting. But that's the idea that emerges in Jewish mysticism. Now there are characters that live in this lower realm. You and I, we're part of the lower realm. We're part of a realm of darkness, of doubt, of confusion, of struggle, of
bureaucracy,
pain.
Please.
Bureaucracy, right? Particularly living here in Israel, the Kafkaesque. So we're in the darkness, right? We're in the helem, as the Kabbalists would call it, the absence of God, and therefore it's upon us to create that redemption here in the darkness. Now, a character can transition in mystical and Jewish thought to leave the realm of darkness to enter the light, right? So Elijah, he ascends. Enoch ascends to God. Moses is a demigod. He's half God, half man, according to the Kabbalists. He's Ish Elokim. And I feel like those characters are no longer capable of playing an actual role in the redemption, because they're no longer in the doubt and the darkness that me and you ordinary humans are in. They've seen too much. They know too much.
Not because like they're far away, because let's say Joseph, he had some struggles.
Right.
You can say he's like, on this only spiritual. He's the head of the bureaucracy, He invented the bureaucracy of giving, food to a whole nation.
I think here we have to distinguish between biblical readings of Joseph, rabbinic reading of Joseph, Kabbalistic readings, and Hasidic readings of Joseph.
Okay.
Right, because for yes, in the biblical story, he's very human and he's there's temptations and there's challenges, but in the Kabbalist reading, he's an archetype. He is the Sphira of Yesod. He is the tzaddik. He's beyond all of these stories are just like sort of these cosmic narratives, and he doesn't actually struggle like me and you humans. So I think it depends on who.
Yeah, sure. Even David, they turn like
right.
The biblical David is different from the midrashic.
Right. The classic Talmudic expression that whoever says that David sinned is making a mistake. So I think like we're talking here from the perspective of the mystics, and therefore it's not like I'm still waiting to find this in Kabbalistic sources, but like from the way I see it, the reason why Moses doesn't go into Egypt is because the Kabbalists say that if he does, that's the end of time. Into Israel.
Yeah.
From Egypt.
Yeah.
Because if he does, that's the end of times. That's like the power of the tzaddik.
Too much light.
Right, too much light. It just shatters everything. And because it kind of ends the game too soon, his own generation doesn't enter the redemption. They get stuck in limbo. They get stuck in the desert. Right? The Dor
Very
HaMidbar.
tragical. It's more tragical than my description of history. Yes.
It's very tragic,
but
right?
It is.
And Moses as his primary role is to be a shepherd and a leader. He doesn't go ahead into like to bring the end game on. He stays with these people, and he stays in an unknown grave in the desert to be with them. And Joshua goes in, and Joshua walks in with the people, and the people have to. This is the point that I'm trying to get to. The people have to walk in on their own 2 feet. They can't be carried in by their Moses, by Moses, who's described as a nurse and as their mother and as their teacher and as the face of God when he descends from Sinai.
So you're saying there are no teachers in the Messianic time?
I think there can't be teachers.
Can't be teachers.
Yes, at least in the.
So what are you doing this podcast?
We're in conversation. We're not teaching. We're thinking together.
So there's only chavrutot in this Messianic, in your Messianic world.
I think chavrutza, the form of peer study, I think is one form which is particularly.
There will be no rabbis.
By the way, what's the model? What's the midrashic model of the end of times, of the sages? That they're all standing in a circle, right? And they're facing each other in the circle. They're not one standing, one sitting.
Although the Zohar picture is different,
what
right?
do you see there in the Zohar?
In the Zohar, you can see, when we learned it, I think last week, we hear it Melilla, right? The thing that there is a mador, there is a section for every group, and Moshe he keeps on teaching. He keeps
right.
Like he teaches in the upper worlds, right? And when a person has passed away, he went, if it's a tzaddik, he went to yeshiva shel mala, the whole concept of yeshiva shel mala, right? There is something there. But, and also you have the descriptions of the ma'agal, right? Around, and the tzaddikim are all, Atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lasot Machol HaTzaddikim, this like round, thing. This is a question. I don't know why.
Oh, interesting. So you're juxtaposing those two models.
There's two models. Yeah, it's not one. It's not monolithic. But do we want to live in the times there will be no teachers?
I mean, listen, we're already experiencing what's known as the death of the authority. Right?
I'm not sure I'm prepared. I think I'm a soul. I told you. You describe it and I think, oh my God, it's not only anarchy. It's like there is no line. I don't know.
There's no
standard.
Line. There's no
standard.
Line.
There is no standard. Everything is TikTok.
Everything is TikTok. Everyone becomes
everyone has
an opinion,
a channel.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I mean, it's like a radical egalitarianism in a very literal sense of the term, that everyone is equal in that space, and we're seeing that. I mean, I don't have what degree do I have to teach or to be sharing on? I have no. I mean, I have
nobody checked.
No one asked me. No one appointed me. No one.
You don't have your CV down below.
That's right.
Under the podcast.
So it's already happening, whether we like it or not. Today, experts we're less likely to take an opinion from an expert than we are to take from a face that we've come to.
Right. Oh, it's all about recommendations.
Right. It's the amami. It's being part of the people. It's.
Can we stop the train? Suddenly we've gone too far.
But it's interesting because you were saying before that you don't want to be the masculine form of teacher who knows it all and who is the direct link.
It's only masculine. I think.
Okay, I'm putting words in your mouth.
Yeah, I think there is a method. You can't. I don't know. Go to the ballet. Yeah, you have a method. You have something. You have stand. We still have to keep the grid of the world as I see it, but I don't think we should have close the universities and only go to TikTok and to YouTube, because now everybody just knows and everybody feels.
It's interesting because
what do you think about books? Then
I love books.
No, but then if you don't need a teacher, maybe you don't need a book. Maybe you just have to think about. You woke up this morning and you had this beautiful idea and just a beautiful sense of something, and just share it with everybody.
It's
I'm sorry.
No. Firstly, I fully appreciate the disagreement. This is part of the Chavruta model.
I'm sorry, I'm Russian. I can't pretend.
I think by disagreeing with me, you're allowing me to be a peer with you in this conversation, right? You're not telling me, Zevi, shut up. I'm going to tell you this is how it is.
This is the end of the day. Let me describe it.
No, you're inviting me into conversation, and I appreciate it. It's funny because when you're saying words and they're conjuring like images, like biblical and Kabbalistic in my mind, you said how there's no more any line, right? There's no more any standard.
In the picture you're painting.
In the picture that I'm describing, right.
Yeah.
And the Kabbalists use that metaphor, that we're moving from the line, from the kav, from the masculine, to the igul, to the circle, to the machol, to the circular, to the
But
to the
I don't think you
perichosis.
lose the line.
You don't lose the line?
I don't think.
Well, I mean,
not yet. Not when you have history, time, politics.
But we're moving beyond time.
No, everything is on time. This podcast is also on time. Everything is on time.
One second. Firstly, people can go backwards and forward. There's no time. Right? And for those that know, this podcast didn't happen all in one time. This happened. We've stitched time together here. We're playing with time. Part of the mediums here are transcending time. But the other thing is, when you said so there's no teacher, there's no books anymore. There's a biblical prophecy, a Messianic prophecy in Jeremiah 31 that no person shall teach their brother. They shall know the Lord, because they will all know me. That yes, part of the prophecy is that we no longer need teachers, because the knowledge of God fills the earth like the water covers the sea. Which is the end of Maimonides, one of his great books. He puts out this entire book, and he ends by saying basically, we won't need these books anymore because you'll know.
But who told you that this is the time?
I see it happening already. I just see it happening. I see the decline of authority. I see the absolute lack of the gatekeepers of information.
The hippies will call it the
I see women
age of
teaching.
Aquarius.
Okay, I don't know about ages.
I don't know.
But I see women teaching. I see the ascent of Malchut, the ascent of the feminine to a place of teacher.
This is only half world, Zevik. Half world is still fighting for food in Africa. Half world is going back to fundamentalism,
right?
To regimes. Iran was quite open and now quite shut, and now open and now. And I don't want to go to politics, but you have all kinds of strange movements towards forward and back.
Right.
The idea that we see around us only progress is, I would ask, like, what is your surrounding? What is your sources? Because you still have a lot of suffering in the world.
Right.
And this also the feminine revolution, well, I see it around me, and this radius of 1 kilometer in Jerusalem, which is very, very feminist. But when I moved only 1 centimeter out of this radius, the world is quite not in this situation.
Right.
A few weeks ago, I went outside here in Hartman Institute there, and I saw a woman is going very disturbed with her bag open. What caught me was her computer almost fell from her bag, and she was trying to avoid a man, which may be a spouse, maybe somebody she knew, maybe a friend, I don't know. She tries to avoid him, and when he was walking, she tried to go slower, and then he was like, and something seems very strange. So right here, and I didn't know what to do, because everything was normal. The sun was in the sky, everything was quiet, but she was crying also. She was really, really disturbed and crying, and he had this also kind of strange hand moving. He was doing like something very, and so I'm kind of an angry person, so I see that I was sensing he's very angry. And I sensed that she was very disturbed, and something doesn't fit. So I came near them, and I asked her if she needs help. And she said very quickly, no, no, no. But then a few minutes after, she ran away to this woods across the street. And to make a long story short, she was in a kind of danger. This continues. The story was, I didn't know what to do. But the interesting thing is that I was so confused. It happened here in the middle of a very, institute that puts feminist worldview in its, thought, and in the middle of, this progress, and the world is great and everything is great. But I think we're avoiding a lot of things that's happening. I'm sorry, this is how I look at it.
No, you're totally right
who decided that this is
You're totally right to bring that to attention. I totally appreciate that point. I don't think that we need to look very far. As you're saying, we don't need to look to Africa. We can see across the street. And I think we could even look closer. I think even in our own lives, right? There are moments where we feel, when we're feeling purposeful and dedicated and motivated, aligned, and there are times when we're feeling lost and depressed and sad,
and we need guidance,
we need teachers, right? We feel this all the time. It could be like, it's not, and it's hard to hold on to a vision of perfection, of not even perfection.
It's not for perfection. I think that understanding that we are also a student, and we're in the need of somebody to show us, sometimes people can't help themselves, not in only mental way, in a spiritual way also. And I think that not all the pictures we have inside are like, sometimes our path is to learn something from the external world. And sometimes it's a big thing to be a student and to be able to say, now I know that my knowledge is limited, and now I'm opening the YouTube channel and I'm learning. No, not really. But now I'm doing opening a book. Now I understand that this is me. I'm limited, and I'm opened up to learn something new, which is not really new. We're just remembering something, but never mind. I think it's very, very important, and I really hope that I go with Breslov. I think the Messiah will learn books. I really hope so. That the books will stay. Okay, let's sum up that the Rebbes will be gone. Well, not gone. They'll be dancing and all these things. Making a plan now. But leave the books. Well, it's okay. Leave the books. I can live with this.
You know what I feel like now? You know this anti-Semitic trope of the Elders of Zion, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, that they make the plan. I feel like we're sitting here, we're making the plan.
Just
usually it's behind closed doors.
It's okay.
So yes, books.
Yes, books.
No teachers.
If you have to,
if you must. No, I think maybe this is a good point to bring the conversation to a head. And I think part of what we're seeing here, I think this conversation is manifesting a lot of the discussion, right? Where we're manifesting disagreement, We're manifesting attempts to try and figure out what the future should be. And we're doing this as educators, as teachers in very different ways.
And as a students also.
As students as well.
It can.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a student of yours in this conversation, the having an equal seating for men and women in the conversation as well. I think that's part of the Messianic space. So I agree that the world is far from perfect, and I think part of the Messianic recognition, and I would add this to your 3 criteria, that a fourth one, or even the first one really, I'm submitting it for proposal, is the sense that the world is broken, a sense that we're not satisfied with the status quo, a sense that the Ari, Isaac Luria, begins with shvira, that there's a rupture. You said that the Holocaust is a historical sense in a modern, but in many ways, whether it's economic disparity, whether it's gender inequality, whether it's the suppression of someone for the color of their skin, these are all things that I think that they're not against the Messianic impulse. Part of the Messianic impulse is fueled by recognizing those things. It's realizing that the way things are is not good enough, right?
I see.
That we live in a broken reality.
Yeah.
And from that space, we can make attempts to try and heal the world just a little.
Well, some of you, the Messianic people, this kind of people, you can also, just, live.
I think that you're part
simple
of the
life.
I think that you're part of the healing, whether
really?
you like
Thank
it or not.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're gonna conscript you.
No problem. You can call me whatever you like. It's okay. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this whole talk. Really, it's one of my favorite topics, and it's like it's there all the time when I read, when I do scholar things, when I meet people, when I meet students. It's like always there, but I didn't have like this chance to really discuss it. So it's been wonderful for me. Great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very glad. I feel the same, that we spend a lot of time thinking about these things, even teaching them, but we don't get a chance to actually discuss them.
Exactly.
And that's very important. So thank you very much for making time and for joining us
here.
You. I know that it was a lot longer than you initially expected it to be.
It's okay. It's like the Geulah. It's also, it's
never coming, never ending.
No. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra.